Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. We're very lucky today to have Dr Alison Hui with us today from Lancaster University. Not only are you a sociology lecturer, but also a director of student engagement and recruitment at Lancaster University. As I understand that sort of leadership role has taken you sort of down the careers of, education and bringing them together, careers and education. And I think this is a really important topic to talk about. So first of all, thank you for coming and spending some of your time today. I appreciate you're also very busy.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you, Katie, and to talk through some of these issues that I think are really interesting and complicated for all of us.
Oh, definitely. And that's, from a sort of full disclosure here, I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Ellison a while ago, and we started talking about careers and sociology and education. And I was just really intrigued by it. And thinking sort of, what does this even mean as a sociology teacher or a head of department? How do we shoehorn this in? And our conversation, I know, went on for quite a while. And I thought, right, I'm going to pick this up again and definitely sort of share some of the questions I've got with our sort of tutor to you followers. So just thinking about this, what are the myths around sort of sociology and careers? I think if those of us that can remember, there was a sort of BT advert many years ago in the 1980s about, if you've got an ology, then you're a scientist, and it sort of undermines the value of a sociology degree potentially and the option of careers. So how do we debunk these myths initially around careers and sociology?
I think it's a really important question. And, the simple answer is more conversation, more knowledge, more complex considerations of, what those links are between careers and different disciplines. But I think it is a bit of a challenge because we know from research that sociologists go on to so many different career paths. And that is a challenge because then there's no one simple answer. So, you can either end up in a situation where people have no idea what a sociologist would do as a possible career, or because there's so many answers, people can sometimes default for, oh, well, if you do sociology, then that means you're going to be a teacher or you're going to be a social worker, when it's not that straightforward. So I think it is a really important area for us to be getting into conversation around.
So it's mainly having those conversations, because I sort of spoke to you just a minute ago before sort of we started recording, and I just wanted to sort of think, well, I know, is it just, putting a poster on the wall, with careers and a list? And like you said, a lot of people think it's becoming a social worker or a teacher. Or is it more than that? Because I've started to hear both from my own senior leadership and then obviously via sort of Ofsted and literature around careers, this sort of term, the Gatsby benchmark, and it lists 8 things that we should do. And I must admit, I do a lot of nodding and go, yeah, I know what you're talking about in a meeting. And then I'm like, actually, what does that even mean for me as a sociology teacher? Because, it's been put on maybe school improvement plans and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, on sort of the classroom level, how am I going to meet that needs of that? Is it just talking about it? Is it more than that? Is it putting a poster up? Obviously, I know you might know a little bit more about that. So your help and advice would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think you have pointed, Katie, to one of the tensions that's really important in this area, which is that tension between the fact we know that careers and employability is something not only that's important, but that we're going to potentially be accountable for when it comes to school improvement plans and needing to address Gatsby benchmarks. We get the same thing in higher education with, the fact that we have to put on our websites possible career options. We are being asked more by the officer students now to be considering employability and be accountable for the employability of our grads. And I think that the challenge with that is that telling us that we should pay attention doesn't say, as you pointed out, how to do so, why we should do so, what some of the real challenges are in doing that. So it's one reason why I think one of the most useful things we can do is to actually think about how this is grounded in some of our basic passion for the subject, and for what's valuable about it. Because I think, we know not every teacher is a specialist of sociology, but, usually people are engaged in some other social science or humanities subject, and there are certain things in common that we can see are really valuable for the world. And that, I think, is a great place to ground these conversations, because I could start by saying, okay, well, these are all the details of all 8 of the Gatsby benchmarks, and that still is not going to answer that question you had about how can we do this? What does it actually involve for us? And that's where I'm really interested from a kind of leadership perspective in education to be thinking more creatively about what we're expecting of different people and how we can bring people on board. Because I think it's absolutely right that the way a senior leadership team is thinking about careers and employability and creating structures that are supporting that in a school or a university, that should be different than people who are career leads or, here at our university, people who are in the career services and have specialized training around that. And that should be different again from the way that we're being asked to engage if all our role is at the moment is as a subject specialist teacher, where we obviously want to make some of those connections to careers and employability, which is what Gatsby Benchmark 4 is asking us to do, but where we can't be expected to be spending all of our time becoming careers experts in order to do so.
So then, I mean, he talks about the how, and I still think stuff like, okay, I can have those conversations. Is there like an expectation that I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of like, do I spend, I'm trying to think of a scenario, like maybe if I'm teaching, like today, the other day I was teaching the theories, just the theories, getting them introduced to year 12s. And I said, something along the lines of, why is this important? Why do we know this? Obviously, we talked about the purpose of the course, but then I sort of started mentioning, as potential one day employers, you've got to be able to think, you've got to think outside the box, that you might be presented with a problem solving task. It's got to have that sort of lateral thinking. Is that enough just to say that? Or, is it more than that? Because I suppose there's a little bit of self-doubt in that, am I meeting this benchmark? Do I need to do something more explicit, like get someone in from a particular career and to them to talk about it? Or is it enough just to signpost it?
Yeah, that is a really important question. And there's no one answer to it because, partly it's going to depend on what the expectations of particular schools are, if there is a plan for what every subject teacher is supposed to be doing or whether things are centralized. And I think that's really obvious when you see some of the advice that has come out around the Gatsby benchmark. So if anybody hasn't heard of those, basically, nearly a decade ago now, there was a report that was commissioned in order to get best practice for how schools and colleges can actually engage and support students to learning about careers. And those 8 benchmarks are all discussing different dimensions of how that could be done. The one that's most relevant from a sort of teacher standpoint is Gatsby Benchmark 4, which says that we're supposed to be connecting the curriculum and our subjects and integrating careers education into the curriculum somehow. Now, what's quite interesting when you look at some of the guidance that's been produced subsequently around how that could happen, what it might look like, is that it's very clear there are different strategies for doing that. And some schools might have a strategy where they have a career-specific curriculum that somebody is in charge of that just sort of runs alongside all the subjects. And in that kind of context, subject leads might not have any responsibility or no significant responsibility for actually doing more around careers. But there's other schools where that maybe isn't happening, or where perhaps, the way that that's presented, we might think that subjects like sociology, which have these myths we've acknowledged, require a different type of attention. And that's where, I'm really curious about other creative ways that we can think about embedding things in our teaching that are manageable for us, but are also trying to make connections between, some of the pedagogical intent that we might have around our curriculum anyways, and make those links back to careers instead of sort of starting from careers as the thing we have to put in. So, I think there are some opportunities for us to start with what we're already doing and then think about ways that we can get to careers from there.
That's so interesting. Thank you. Because I was thinking, like you said, schools will have different expectations, won't they? It might be something like you said, a career. There would be like a sort of career specialist, or it can be something more informal that could be on a subject level. You mentioned, and I'm sort of putting you on the same spot here, there's this sort of creative element. You said you've been looking at creative ways of doing that. Selfishly, what are these creative ways in which? Because I want some of these creative ways, because I'm sort of thinking, does it feel natural? Like, obviously, if you're conscious of the content that you've got to cover, you've got exams to, and just add another thing to this, like, the plates that you carry
Yeah.
metaphorically. You're like a teacher, you're in school counselor almost, and all these things. You've got to do marking, administration. You might have other roles with outside the school. Oh, and by the way, it's just about to tip over. Can you also teach careers? So these creative ways, please enlighten me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not the only person who's thought about this, but one thing that's been really interesting for me, and this is connecting up some of the research I've done in the past, some of the theoretical interests I have around structuration and social practice theories. And so, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how, if we just start from the basic principle that we don't have one career, we have multiple careers, that I think is a really interesting hook. And it relates to what you just said about the multiple plates that people are carrying. But it also has a really useful set of sociological roots that we can point to and connect up to aspects of the curriculum. So, just to give you a sense of some of those roots and ways that we could connect it up. One is that obviously there is lots of research around careers and gender and aspects of complexities, discriminations, the kind of double burden of having to have a career and also be in charge of many household tasks. And that is one thing that already I know a lot of teachers will be touching upon or addressing in discussing different types of feminist theories and the family. And that is one space where we can just make very apparent. It is clear that there are multiple careers going on here and that they can conflict with each other. And I think that basic step to saying a career is not necessarily just about paid work is one step away from this simple equation of the career means a job title, as opposed to a career means getting embedded in developing, acquiring, shifting, juggling different skills, knowledges, roles throughout one's lifetime. And there is lots of sociological work that points to that more expansive understanding of a career as moving through time, engaging in different types of practices. So I think it's an interesting starting point, because from that, you can imagine sort of setting up a way of engaging with your teaching where what you're doing is just spiraling back to that kind of basic point in different bits of the curriculum, right? So, when it comes to things like thinking about crime, then Becker's work in the book Outsiders and talking about how people are jazz players or jazz musicians or marijuana users, they have careers, they develop a way of knowing how to do these things. That's a really interesting case that you could just bring in a little bit to complement that thought. Thinking about things like leisure, like media, you've got great examples, everything from the way I was mentioning earlier to you, Katie, my PhD research talked about how people travel with their leisure, how they are actually building up these careers, they're building up skills, they end up being taken to places, events, things because of what they're passionate about doing in their leisure time. But we also have great examples like Michael Sheen, who's a past sociology student, who's doing fascinating things like declaring himself a not-for-profit actor,
Yeah.
which is just really interesting in the context of media industries, the kinds of power relations, and how one person might have power to start destabilizing that or bringing in new conversations around it. And then in terms of theory, there are lots of things not only related to career literature and people who've researched careers, but also from areas of interest like my interest in structuration and practice theories, because within practice theories that people have been continuing to develop since Giddens and since Foucault, we actually think about the way that any set of organized activities somebody's involved in can be something that you sort of carry along with you and have a career in. So in that sense, I trained much earlier in my life. I started a bachelor's degree in business administration. I very quickly got bored with it and abandoned it. But having developed some of those skills around accountancy, around project management, I'm now finding that they're being incredibly useful in my present role, even though I didn't have a formal career in administration or in management. So I think those opportunities to sort of link things through, encourage students to delve into, say, the data that exists around graduate outcomes for sociology grads, think about the comparisons and contrast with other subjects. Those are all great opportunities for thinking about how this multiplicity of skills and knowledges and careers actually means that what we're doing is not hunting for the one answer of what we should do in our life, but hunting for, okay, what are the things I'm good at? What am I really passionate about continuing to develop? And how can I actually take a kind of personal reflection on that into account when I think about the way that careers evolve over time?
Gosh, there's so much you've said there. Like literally, my head was like, I was just absorbing it all because actually, it's really different from what I initially thought. Like as I understood it, with my sort of nodding in a meeting, going, I know what you're talking about, but really, I didn't. I thought it was like, okay, so like really signposting it in a, I don't know, in a really transparent way, and then you're like, oh, if you want to be da 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 da, then this would be really good for, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm trying to think. Okay, so so students want to take medicine. You're like, oh well, this is really good to understand palliative care because you're having that empathy and really sort of signpost, which I think would be part of it from what you're saying. But what I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that actually it's talking about careers quite generically in some respects and not all about just the individual, and saying, what does this mean for women? What does it mean for ethnic minorities? Is there other forms of career, like sort of the deviant career you were talking about earlier? Is careers as in regards to, I suppose, you've got obviously your theories, which would probably be like sort of from a sociology teacher at A level would be sort of the laissez-faire economics from sort of a right-wing perspective, and even having discussions around sort of, I suppose, Marxism and capitalism and that debate. And so actually it's talking about the concept of careers potentially, and is it all something that, like you said, paid employment, and has that got more value or not than other careers that you might have or other skills? So there's lots to think about there, and I think you sort of mentioned that idea of it being transferable as well. Like yourself, you use your example of you doing business administration, and you've taken that journey into obviously sociology. So that is, for me, it's just blown out my mind, because I was like, oh my gosh, I was like thinking there's a link there, there's a link there, there's a link there in sociology. When we think about sort of the education unit we have to teach, there's quite a lot for teachers that could take along from that, which is regards to, well, these students do better because of their parents have these careers in education. Is that right? Is that wrong? And also thinking about that mobility within education. So actually there's quite, as I'm understanding it, there's a lot of signposting that can go on from that. Is that right? Is that what it could look like in a sort of, I don't know, in a different sense than just a poster on a wall?
Absolutely. I think you've absolutely captured what I was trying to get across, and also this important difference. So I think it's one thing that I'm certainly not trying to come off as critical of, leadership teams who are trying to sort of say, okay, we just need to make it more visible how this equates to this, how you need this subject to get into this role, because that is really important for some subjects. My concern is that thinking about what kind of leadership we need to make sure sociology graduates in particular can make a difference in the world and can be really successful and help shape some of the social change that I know some of them get really passionate about, I think that concern leads to a different way of approaching the challenge of how do we make things obvious to students? How do we make sure they'll be able to use the skills and knowledges they have afterwards? And having conversations with different alumni who've gone on to work in very different sectors after having studied sociology, it's just so apparent to me that it doesn't make sense for us to continue only participating in conversations that are about study this, you'll get to this, or this is required for this, or these are the roles you could go to. Because when it comes to sociology, as one of the alumnus that I was speaking to at a public event last autumn said, people don't know, employers don't necessarily know what sociology is, but if you tell them what you know and the skills that you have, they will say, ooh, I need that. That's what I want in this role and in my organization. And I think that's one of the main reasons that when it comes to sociology, it might be really advantageous for us to think about different ways of approaching a conversation around careers that are grounded in and growing from the kind of themes and concerns that we're already engaged in the classroom. And, I think it's also really worthwhile thinking about how we can do that alongside and in collaboration with broader strategies for implementing careers within a school, because these are not exclusive. It's just that, the poster might have a different emphasis, and might be providing a little bit more of the how do you get to the roles instead of just what the roles are, for example.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because I know that the last time I met you, that you talked about the sort of the different graduates and what careers they'd gone into, and they'd written like little statements about and they were such vast careers, weren't they? And I remember thinking sort of when you shared that bit of information, that I use this a lot with my students. Is I'm quite old, and I said to them, when I was at school, I only had a computer lesson once a fortnight. You're developing, or you're working for an uncertain future. And they went, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, when I was young, I had a computer lesson once a fortnight, and then look at the world now. To work in any industry, you need access to computers, whereas I think I use Paint once a fortnight. And the careers have changed so much that actually you've got to have those transferable skills, that in the sense of I need to do this to become this is actually quite an outdated concept, because we're living in a very, if I suppose from a postmodernist perspective, a very changeable society. It's very uncertain. So, and actually something like computing really shows that. I mean, who would have thought in the 80s there would be an influencer and online marketing? Do you know what I mean? So I think, and then, I think that helps as well parents, because I think I'm sure I'm not alone in this, that some teachers will have one opening, what will my son or daughter do with the sociology A level? And actually most of those parents will remember the 80s, and that's quite a good reference point, and they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, what is the future? What's that gonna hold? Thinking about this, is there anywhere that we could go to get more information on this? It's really practical, because you sort of mentioned this Gatsby benchmark. You've mentioned like there's a website where you can get a bit more information about that. Are there also any schools or any sort of further education establishments that have worth looking onto their website? I don't know of anyone you've worked with. We can get more information on this, because I know that myself, maybe other people want more expertise in this. I wouldn't mind to sort of look and see what it is. I feel like I think from a sense of view, I've got what it is, which is it's a lot more holistic. But actually, it'd be really good to see some good practice out there.
Absolutely. So in terms of some of the published work that's been done around implementing the Gatsby benchmarks, the best place to go is the website of the Careers and Enterprise Company, because they've developed a whole set, of resources. And the other great thing that they've done is they have various teachers and schools who've been leaders in this area that they've got short profiles of, that you could then follow up in terms of thinking about what does it look like to have a different type of strategy in terms of how we implement some of this. And so some of those interventions might not be specific to sociology and might not be engaging quite with what I've been saying in terms of grounding us in our discipline. But I think they're great starting points for thinking about how exactly can we get into conversations about this. And for example, how could we connect up our curriculum and our curriculum intent with ways of specifically addressing this? And so I think those are really interesting conversations, because particularly, things like a school that I'm on the Board of Governors for, it has been doing a lot of work around curriculum and actually embedding disciplinary literacy in their curriculum and their approach. And that to me is just such a wonderful starting point to think about, okay, not only how do students read, write, think in a particular subject, but what does that also then mean in terms of the way they're contrasting with those who have other disciplinary expertise when it comes to careers. And I think that's a really important part of thinking about how our multiple discipline interests and strengths are actually going to contribute in the future. But there are also lots of other resources that might not be specific to this broader sort of thinking about how you embed it in pedagogy or how you lead on this work, but are really around immersing us in experiences of different types of work and some of the dimensions of these social complexities. So there's a podcast called Climbing the Rungs, which does a fantastic job of connecting up issues around social mobility and careers and thinking about the real obstacles that people face when they come from certain backgrounds and are trying to go into roles that they don't have, familial communities that are already in those kinds of job roles, etc. So that's one great option. And there's also a huge range of different podcasts talking about aspects of work more generally. There's one called Women at Work, which is focusing specifically on some of the challenges women face in the workplace, and not only around, work-life balance issues, but also around some aspects of gender socialization and, the challenge of giving feedback or being in a leadership position when perhaps some people are not, or some industries have not traditionally had as many women in those kinds of roles. So I think there are so many podcasts you can dip into, that website. There also are lots of profiles of sociologists who've gone on to work in different areas on the Applied Sociology website. So that's a great place that if you're thinking about how do I connect up some of, a particular unit of study to, say, a case study of a person, that we can then think about which of their sociological skills are they using. That's a website where you can look at a whole bunch of profiles and sort of draw from some of those real alumni and what they're doing, how they're being sociologists in different industries today.
Gosh, so I've been teaching sociology for a while. I've not heard of one of those websites in my life, and I don't know how I've got to this point. So I'm super grateful for that. I think, I just think to myself that actually this has been super. Like, obviously, it's been so super useful, and it's not just a case of. I think my biggest takeaway from this is it isn't something that's just an add-on. It's something that we're embedding as part of our sort of discourse and our narrative, like with our students. And I think that actually maybe with practice that it becomes almost the norm within the classroom. That I think for me, useful. I'm just reflecting what you're saying, because you've said a lot, and in my head's going shh like that, and I'm thinking to myself, I know that is. We talk about curriculum intent and stuff like that, and I think sometimes you do it because you feel like you have to, but actually just mapping out for you, maybe as a teacher, all the opportunities that are available. And I know sometimes it feels like it's a thing you have to do because someone's asked you to do it, but actually that might be really helpful to think, actually, like you said, Becca, we're talking about Embedding Careers, or when you're looking at education, and actually there's lots of different links there that actually pre-exist without having them to be add-ons. I've got one more final question, and I know that you've said lots, and I almost have to feel like I have to digest it all. One of them is, okay, we agree, we know that this is something we've got to do, okay, and it's important, but why is it important? Because obviously there's going to be some people, including myself at some moments. I'm a sociology teacher, I'm not like we said, careers advisor. I want them to have sociological knowledge, and that's the most important thing. Or some people's belief is that we've got to pass exams. I'm sure there's people that think that. Why is it actually important, do you think, that teachers do incorporate, this careers element? Because we've talked about the how, but we haven't talked about the why so much. Why is it important?
I think it's a really good question. And I think, drawing back to that tension about, the way that we might feel obligated to do this for various reasons because of all the structures around us, the way we might feel about the subject, what we actually connect to. I think there are two things to me that are really important to remember. One being that, when we think about sociology and the way that it facilitates this critical consideration of the challenges we all face and what structures are reinforcing them, how they might change, that to me is a kind of conversation that we need today more than ever. And being able to help in some small way to make sure our students can go on and contribute to that conversation after they graduate, rather than feeling like they have to just go away from it and not continue studying the subject. I think that's a really important thing, because I see how sociological thinking makes a difference in different conversations and different spheres of life. But also, I think there's something about, our role as teachers, and the fact that probably for a lot of us, we're invested in teaching because we care about pedagogy. We care about the way that students develop themselves, develop their knowledge, grow. And really, careers and how we understand careers should be a part of that. Unfortunately, for many people, and I would say myself included, we learn about it accidentally by actually, growing older, having experiences, and then going, oh, now I know what I would tell my 15-year-old self about what a career actually is. But that's,
I hear you. I hear you.
I think we have an opportunity. And in that sense, I'm not saying we should all have to take all of that work on ourselves. Absolutely not. But I do think that there is space for these conversations where we can say, hey, what are your strategies? What are mine? How can we have conversations about this, share some of the load? And, I would be very happy if anyone listening to this wants to get in touch, because I'm myself really interested in figuring out how to continue, sharing, as you mentioned, some of those resources I've had from previous events that have quotes from alumni and can be sort of put up as evidence of the ways of thinking that sociologists do after they graduate. But also, I'm really interested in having conversations about how we can work better between, HE and schools and colleges to sort of share thinking around this, because, the Office for Students has been saying, well, can we get schools and universities to work better together in order to support things like widening participation? And to me, this is, one small way that co-developing resources, giving feedback on these kinds of ways that we can integrate careers into our own teaching is something that's a small step, but a really important one in that wider mission.
Gosh, it's sort of, yeah. I mean, it is. It sounds like a big responsibility, but I think we've all gone into teaching, like you said. I think, like you said, it's a wider mission. What you said is just so powerful. It really resonates with me, and I was like, oh god, I hear you. On a teacher level, we want our students to be the best version of themselves, to self-actualize, and actually, like you said, we sort of, I hear you on this, where you sort of go on this sort of journey, and like, oh, I wish I knew that when I was 15 years old, especially as well, if it's like you said, widening participation, students that are first generation university students, they're not going to have that narrative of that. And obviously there's an element of, you have to find out for yourself, but actually for those people, it might be a little bit harder. So we've got that as a duty of care. There's also that idea of, as I'm taken away from that, sort of a role of a sociologist as well as a sociology teacher, but as a sociologist in the classroom is to create social action, to not reproduce some of these, I don't know, status quo structures in our society, that there is still this gender pay gap, that actually, if we're having this discussion, this narrative around this, then students are aware of it, enlightened around it, so that actually potentially when they go off and have careers, that actually they're questioning this status quo, and it will no longer be the status quo. So obviously it's a big responsibility, but it's, like you said, it's not something a sole teacher's doing on their own. They're working in collaboration with the universities, as well as obviously maybe other sociology teachers. There's a lot there. That I've started with this journey on careers. When I was at school, they had to make us do a kudos, like this thing called kudos, which you had to type in, and it tells you what job you're going to do. Like, when you do like a agree, strongly agree, and it was like, oh, you could be a dog handler or a teacher. I think that's what it came up for me. But actually, it's much more than this. And actually, I don't know if it's the right word to put on it, but I feel like it's something more moral, something that has more value than just you're going to be a dog handler or a teacher. Do you know what I mean? It's something bigger than that. That actually, like I think using your words, and you said it so well, it's more grounded than that.
Yeah.
Is that how, have I interpreted it right?
Absolutely. And I think it's also empowering in a particular way, because telling a student, you already have lots of careers. There are sociological theories that say, what you're doing in your spare time, what you've learned how to do, even just in terms of basic household activities and chores, those are already careers. So you don't have to stress so much about finding the right career. It's a question of bringing things that you're already doing, you're already interested in, together and thinking about where is the right opportunity for me and how can I contribute in these different ways. And, I think that is a really empowering thing. One of the alumnus that I spoke to at this public event last autumn in the Festival of Social Science is still involved in hospitality, and said, that was sort of a personal, like, part-time job that then after studying sociology, it was like, wait, I can continue working here, but I can make a difference in different ways. And I think that sense of not being hostage to the job opportunities that just exist, but being able to sort of think more critically about where you can go, what you can do, as well as the structural barriers that might be in your way. I think that's really important, since, I've certainly heard that in the context we're living in right now, students have even more worries about what's going to go on, how they're going to get employed. And so I think, there's a certain way this also connects up to making sure our students feel confident that they are not just at the whim of, the structures around them. They have power too.
Gosh, that's so true. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is empowering, isn't it? It's that idea that it isn't. You're not part of the structure. You just need to go and get a job. And it's funny because I was making something yesterday. It just really resonated with what you just said, and I put a quote up that was not my quote. It's from someone else, and it was basically the idea that, when I do this, I'll be happy. When I do this, I'll be happy. Well, actually, that's a backwards way of thinking. I think it's a guy called Sean Anker. Well, I know it's a guy called Sean Anker, but his name underneath the quote. But it's this idea that actually, if you're happy and you do what you're happy, you're always going to do well. And it's sort of a philosophy that I sort of think about as well with teaching. That weirdly, I'm put it out there. I don't get overly concerned about the results and the exams, because I feel if they enjoy the process, they will always get there. I think if they don't enjoy the process, then they're definitely not going to get there, because it's just something they have to do. And I say with probably careers as well, that actually it is a lot more holistic than that. And actually, if it is retail or hospitality that brings you joy, then actually, if you carry on doing that, and don't be afraid, because some of the students I've heard before that, I really love sociology, what can I do with this? Do you think I should go off and do X, Y, and Z instead? But actually, that having to isn't very empowering, and actually it's more than that. So I think it's useful as well to hear it from you. I know it sounds silly, but sometimes you have these ideas in your head, and you've spent time researching this and looking into this. So this is not just some sort of like whim in my head that I'm thinking, am I being a bit risque here? And I'm sure lots of sociology teachers will be listening to this and be thinking, actually, I can be a bit braver in the classroom. And actually, those structures are there, but actually we can work and have a little bit of agency within them potentially.
Absolutely. There's no reason, if it's important for us to engage with careers, we can do it in ways that we find interesting, that we find links to our teaching, and in that sense, it's going to be more meaningful if it is grounded in the work and the things that we're already dedicated to doing.
Oh, thank you. It sounds like it's a bit more authentic from what you're saying. So I'm so thank you for your time. I feel like it's cleared a lot of things up in my head. I'm sure it will clear a lot of things up in other people's heads. There's some great websites there. What I will do, I think when we get this posted, is I'll put those links on there as well, because actually I've never heard of them. So they're really great. And obviously I will be in touch again, because I'd love to sort of make links with you. I'm sure other schools, particularly because obviously you're up. I'm not very good with the geography now, but up north somewhere. I'm down here, so we'll do as well. So thank you for your time, and lovely speaking to you.
It's been a pleasure, Katie. Thanks.
Thank you.